Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald knew each other. One of the big efforts of the cover-up of the Kennedy assassination has been to deny that these people knew each other. But they did know each other. Not only that, Ruby knew Shaw. Because I believe Thomas Edward Beckham when he said that he was with Clay Shaw and they ran into Ruby. And Shaw starts talking to Ruby in a hotel, I think it was the Monte Leon Hotel in New Orleans. Now, I found many witnesses who testified to Jack Ruby and Oswald knowing each other. And they come from a variety of places. It isn't only that woman, Rose Cheramy, who was run over finally and was one of the people who predicted the assassination before it happened. I don't care how many people deny that that occurred, it did. And there was a magician from the club, the Carousel Club, that had seen Oswald there. There was a taxi driver that brought Oswald over there to the Carousel Club. On and on and on and on. And that's another, of course, piece of the proof that there was a conspiracy. Thomas Edward Beckham said, he told me that he said after that Sunday when Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald, how could Jack do that to Lee? And he said that spontaneously. I realized that Beckham has rendered himself impeachable. I realized that Beckham lived his life as a con man, and as he would freely admit, and that was a way of staying alive. And one of the police officers in New Orleans explained to me that that's how many of these people seem to have survived, although you would have think that they would have been killed along with other witnesses, but they are alive because nobody believes them, because they have done so many contradictory things, con men, liars, and so even if they were to testify, their testimony would be worthless, and this is what has kept them alive.
I mean, there were so many witnesses that died. Do you feel, this is kind of an open-end question, I realize, but was the CIA, were intelligence agencies assassinating witnesses to this crime and this cover-up?
I can't prove that the CIA suddenly did a sweep and killed witnesses. I know that the intelligence agencies undermine witnesses in many ways. Julia Ann Mercier, who was a witness for Jim Garrison, who said that she saw a truck on the morning of the assassination driven by Jack Ruby, and that somebody got out with an object that could have been in the shape of a weapon and went up the grassy knoll. And she was brutalized by the FBI, and that's a Freudian slip. Her words were changed, and the report that was written about the interviews with Julia Ann Mercier contradictory to what she actually said. She recognized Ruby instantly from his photograph. And then she turned over the photograph later, and there was the word Jack Ruby written on the back. So she knew who it was. Otherwise, who would have heard of Jack Ruby? I mean, unless you went to the Carousel Club, you might not have known. He was a low-level gambling mafia-type figure in Dallas.
Hospital, do you know anything about that?
I don't, but Seth Cantor had no reason to lie. Seth Cantor is a credible witness, a reporter. Mm-hmm. And there'd be no reason for him to. So I think when we look at the witnesses and we have to decide who's credible and who isn't, we have to first see whether they're testifying against their own interest. For example, Thomas Edward Beckham refused Oliver Stone. Well, he didn't participate. Oliver Stone's people tracked him down, and he decided not to cooperate with them. Well, if he wanted notoriety and he wanted to get money more than anything, I'm not saying people don't want money, he would have certainly worked with Oliver Stone, but he didn't. So I found him a reluctant witness. This doesn't mean that he's a saint or that everything he does we would approve of, and so forth. But that's not the same thing. And each person, Jack Martin, that's a witness that has also been criticized. But when we look at Jack Martin, we can see he knew things that he should not have known. And he had contacts, for example, with Senator Long, with Jack J.P.F. Gremillion, who was the Attorney General of the state of Louisiana. What are all these police contacts and high contacts in the Federal Aviation Commission and all this with Jack Martin? Well, on the day that Carlos Marcello was kidnapped by the Department of Justice on the orders of Robert Kennedy, Jack Martin knew about this in advance, because Jack Martin told a friend of his partner in the detective work, Joe Newbrough, let's go have a cup of coffee and breakfast in this cafe. They go to, and I'll show you something. So they're sitting there. Jack Martin is drinking bad coffee, which is all he never ate at all. Newbro's fat, he was eating. And they look out the window, and then suddenly they see Carlos Marcello being, ushered into a car and driven away. How did Jack Martin know a day in advance that Carlos Marcello, who couldn't have known it himself, or he wouldn't have allowed himself to be kidnapped, so-called mafiosi over there. And Jack Martin also knew when Jim Garrison was arrested some years later, for the pinball, so-called accepting bribes from pinball owners, that he would be taken to the Wildlife and Fisheries building. There's Jack Martin in the crowd, and he says to the crowd, let's hear it for the district attorney, and they all applaud and so forth. Jack Martin seems to be everywhere. He knows about that cookout photograph where we see David Ferrie and Lee Harvey Oswald together in the same photograph. He seems, what is all this? And he's also the handler of Thomas Edward Beckham. And he steals the Oswald file from Guy Bannister's office, which occasions an event that everybody does know about, which is the pistol whipping of Jack Martin by Guy Bannister, I believe on the evening after the assassination.
Who was Thomas Edward Beckham?
Thomas Edward Beckham was a kid. I think he was illiterate. He lived in New Orleans. He was a singer under the name Mark Evans. He was a folk singer. He was he used to do the announcements at the bus station. He was a hanger-on, and he was taken up by Guy Bannister as a runner, as a kid that was involved with Bannister's operations. Jack Martin takes over, and it seems to me that he recruited Thomas Edward Beckham for some intelligence role. And what I discovered, and I believe it, is that Thomas Edward Beckham was trained to be the patsy should Lee Harvey Oswald have decided not to go to the Texas School Book Depository that day, perhaps left Dallas, not cooperated with, not been in the program, penetrated the program. Maybe Nagel told him something. Nagel felt sorry for Oswald, and Oswald run away. He had nowhere to go, of course. One of the things I wanted to say about Oswald was that Oswald loved infiltrating, quote unquote. And I have a wonderful story that was, first of all, we know that Oswald loved Herbert Philbrick's book, I Led 3 Lives, and he used to watch it on television in these episodes. And Philbrick was a person who pretended to be a communist and infiltrated the Communist Party on behalf of the FBI. So Oswald, as a kid, liked to infiltrate, and he one day appeared at the Astronomy Club in New Orleans, and the head of the Astronomy Club, whose name was William Wolfe, said, "Well, what are you doing here? You obviously have no interest in astronomy. You don't know anything about it." And Oswald said, "I like to infiltrate." This was from very young. So we can see from Philbrick being his model, he'd be a perfect person to be recruited out of the Marines to be in the defector program, the false defector program, to be working with these anti-Castro Cubans. Oswald believes that he is involved somehow in anti-Castro operations. He said it as much. One of my best witnesses was the medical director of the East Louisiana State Hospital at Jackson, which was Dr. Frank Silva, who saw Oswald in the hospital, and I'll talk about this in a moment, talking about how he was going to kill Castro. He had his Marine Corps training, and he knew how to do it, and he was going to do it. Well, this gets us back to the story of Ferrie and Shaw taking Oswald up to Clinton and Jackson. What was the assignment? Why were they up there? Well, they were up in Clinton because Oswald was trying to register to vote. Why is this person who lives in New Orleans going up to Clinton, Louisiana to register to vote? It's ridiculous. What's he doing? His assignment was, it turns out, to get a job at the insane asylum, which was the East Louisiana State Hospital at Jackson. And if you look, and I did, at the application for employment, it says, "Are you a registered voter in East Feliciana Parish?" Well, if you're you have to know 2 people. So Oswald goes up to the hospital, and he finds out he has to be a registered voter. Then he goes to Clinton, and he tries to register to vote. He doesn't register to, actually, well, I take that back. He does register to vote, only the page is torn out of the registration book where Oswald's name was Lee H. Oswald. He did register to vote, and after that, Henry Earl Palmer, who was the registrar of voters up there in Clinton, it got very nervous, and when somebody got to him, and the book disappears, the page disappears, the whole book disappeared. So by the time years pass, we don't have that registration book anymore. The FBI seems to have swept away all those records. It's pretty clear.
Thomas Edward Beckham was paid to take some sketches, photographs from...
Yes. Thomas Edward Beckham, in the office of a lawyer named Ray Gill, who was a mafia lawyer and for whom David Ferrie was working. They bring Thomas Edward Beckham in there and they say, could you take these documents, these are maps and charts of Dealey Plaza, and bring it to Dallas? The kid doesn't, he's hardly literate. I mean, he was taught to read and write by another CIA operative named Fred Lee Chrisman, whom he met in New Orleans. So Beckham is told to go on the airplane, keep your mouth, he's very talkative, so he was told, don't say anything, don't wear all your jewelry, wear a lot of rings and gold necklaces and all of this, and deliver these documents to a person named Lawrence Howard, who was involved in anti-Castro activities. And so Beckham goes and does, and eventually we find vestiges, remnants of that package belonging to David Ferrie. We find them in his office, at his desk, rather, at G. Ray Gill's office, where a witness came forward to Jim Garrison named Bootsy Gay, and she somehow saw Ray's secretary throwing out these records, and she reaches in the garbage pail and pulls it out. Each time they take it away from her and throw it away again. And there was also a young man working for David Ferrie named Jimmy Johnson who also saw these documents. Maps, charts, records, pictures of Dealey Plaza predicting the assassination in the possession of David Ferrie, which would have been very good evidence had Ferrie lived to be tried by Jim Garrison.